Hi everyone, and happy Halloween. Thank you for joining this Heritage Foundation Facebook Live. We're joined once again by Hans von Spakovsky, who is a senior legal fellow here at Heritage and also serves on President Trump's Presidential Advisory Commission on Election Integrity. Thank you for joining us, sir.
Thanks for having me on October 31st.
Yes, sir. And since it is Halloween, we have to talk about zombies. And while you might not believe in the walking dead, there is evidence of the voting dead. How terrifying is that?
Well, it's a bad problem, and one of the reasons is the states aren't doing a very good job of cleaning up their voter rolls. A couple of years ago, the Pew Foundation actually did a study, and they discovered that there were almost 2 million people who are dead who are still registered to vote across the country. Now, that's not necessarily a problem if that person isn't voting. But there's also cases and evidence that, in fact, some people are taking advantage of that. You may recall prior to the last election, a CBS station in Los Angeles took the voter registration list, compared it to the Social Security's master index, and found a couple of hundred people who had been voting repeatedly in elections after they were dead. A lot of this is done through absentee ballots, so it's very clear that somebody, wherever those absentee ballots were being mailed, was filling them out, signing them, and sending them in.
Now, we just launched an online database at heritage.org/voter fraud that you can check out online, and it goes through all the different voter fraud that we have found here at Heritage, showing over 1,088 proven instances of voter fraud, 949 criminal convictions, and 48 civil penalties. What's the most shocking thing that you've seen and that we've found on there?
What's most shocking about it, one, this happens all over the country. We have cases from just about everywhere. But the second thing is that, look, this is just the tip of the iceberg. We've run across hundreds, if not thousands, of other cases where they did things like they found non-citizens who had been registered to vote, many of whom had voted, who were dropped by election officials when they discovered it, but that information was never sent to law enforcement, so the cases never got prosecuted. So we know that there are many more cases of election fraud all across the country that don't get prosecuted, that sometimes prosecutors don't even find out about because election officials don't let them know.
And on this online database, you can actually go through and click on each state to see the different types of election fraud that are happening throughout the country.
Yeah, and look, it's everything from absentee ballot fraud to people voting in multiple states because they're registered in more than one state, to non-citizens registering and voting in elections.
Now, walk us through some of the most common types of voter fraud. Is it the false registration? Is it...
Probably the most common kind of voter fraud is absentee ballot fraud, because those ballots, as you know, are requested often by mail. They're mailed out, they're completed and sent back, so no election official ever actually sees the person who requested the ballot. And it's relatively easy for someone, either a candidate or people who work for him, often they'll go into particularly poor neighborhoods and follow the mail truck from place to place so they can collect those ballots and either forge them and fraudulently vote them or basically tell the voters how to do that. We have a conviction actually recently, I think from Texas, of someone who worked for the U.S. Postal Service who was cooperating with folks who were doing that.
Wow. Now, how important is election integrity to our democratic system?
Oh, it's very important. If you look at the polling on this, the confidence that people have in the election process is a key to having them turn out and participate in elections. And when they don't have confidence in that, they're not going to go out and vote. Plus, look, we want to be sure that when we are exercising our most fundamental right, the right to vote, on which all of our other rights depend, that the person who got the most votes is actually the person who's declared the winner.
Now, what would you say to groups who maybe argue that the amount of voter fraud that there is insignificant?
Well, what I would say to them is that, look, back in 2008, when the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Indiana's photo ID law for voting, what the court said was the U.S. has a long history of voter fraud, and it could make the difference in a close election. And that's the key. We have close elections all the time, particularly down at the town and county level. Elections are decided by a handful of votes. And in all the places where that happens, just a little bit of fraud could change the outcome. And that cheats the American voter.
Now, to wrap us up here, what should state governments and the federal government be doing in order to fix this system?
There's a whole series of steps they should take. The most obvious is requiring a government-issued photo ID when you vote both in person and absentee. Obviously, they should provide a free ID for anyone who doesn't have one, but in modern America, the number of people who don't have an ID is a tiny, tiny percentage. Also, they should require proof of citizenship when you register to vote. Additionally, there should be database comparisons. States aren't taking advantage of the fact that they have DMV records, they have tax records, all of which could be used to check the information in the voter registration files to make sure it's a real person, it's a real address, they're actually living, and they are a U.S. citizen.
Well, thank you, sir.
Thanks.
And thank you all for joining us today. The database is available online at heritage.org/voter-fraud. We hope you all have a safe and happy Halloween. Beware of those zombie voters out there.